audio, everybody. Coming to you cordless from Minneapolis. It's Thursday night, December 12th, 2024. It's 9 p.m. on the East Coast of the United States, 6 p.m. on the West Coast, 8 a.m. in Singapore, 12 noon in Sydney, Australia, and here I'm sitting in Northeast Minneapolis. It's 8 p.m. Central Time. Get your crap together, man. I'm Jim Peters. Welcome to another edition of Jim Peters Tonight. This is episode number 185, if you're keeping track. And why shouldn't you? Don't have a guest tonight. And I've got some really depressing news here. Well, it's depressing for me. We're not on Blog Talk Radio again this evening. Now, we couldn't connect. Those of you who listened on Monday and Tuesday, we did 2 pre-recorded shows. And they're tests, and I can't tell you what they're for, but we did 2 pre-recorded tests. It's the first time we've ever pre-recorded an entire episode. We've had a lot of interviews we pre-recorded, but it's the first time we did 2 shows that were pre-recorded from beginning to end. So still, we ran them as live shows. In other words, you know, the video for those programs started on at exactly 8 o'clock and ran live on YouTube and Rumble and all those other places. But we couldn't connect on to Blog Talk Radio on Monday night. We didn't even try on Tuesday night. You know, they're going out of business next month. Our last scheduled show on there was next Thursday, a week from today, December 19th, our last show before the Christmas break. We're not even going to bother anymore. We're done. So it's plenty obvious they've not bothered to fix a bunch of technical details before they're closing. So we're just getting off. That's all there's to it. So now, unfortunately, and this, you know, the reason we do this show live is because the interactive aspect of it. I like talking to you people, and you call up, and considering the number of viewers we've had an enormously positive reception regarding call-ins. I mean, we get for our weight, we get way more call-ins than most other places. So, I mean, I watch Jimmy Fallon on Fox News. He does Fox Across America. It's a show. It's a radio show. It's on 161 affiliate stations across the United States from 12 to 3 p.m. Eastern, and he doesn't get any more calls than we do. So, I've talked to Michael Harrison, the founder of Talkers Magazine, about this, and you know, he said that, and I know this is true, but it was nice hearing it from an expert, that calls to radio station talk shows are down all across America, and yet we're still kind of getting them. And so it was like, that was kind of cool. But can't take your call tonight because Blog Talk Radio supplies their telephone number. Now, after we come back in January, on January 6th, we will have a new telephone number to call into. So we won't be on Blog Talk Radio anymore. And like I said, they're going out of business on January 31st. But we will have a new call-in number. So you'll still be able to call in. So we'll still do the show live, I think. Okay. So enough of that business, huh? All right. So I thought I'd tell you about the weather here in Ely, Minnesota, up north in northern Minnesota today. And this is not the wind chill. This is the actual temperature. It was 31 degrees below zero. Did you get that? 31 degrees. Now, I have Italian cars. They won't start if it's below 22 degrees below zero. And I'm not kidding. They won't. They just said straight out, we got a thermostat here. Won't work. We're not going to let you start the car. Now, normally, and the reason we didn't do a show last night is because I was at my 100-year-old mother's Christmas party in southern Minnesota. It's about a 90-minute drive from Minneapolis. And it was kind of treacherous because yesterday it was pretty cold here. It was colder today. Matter of fact, if I'm right, the temperature right now I think is two above. And it was about zero yesterday, regardless of what. I think when we got home, I think it was 1 below. If I'm right. We got home in the evening. We usually don't see temperatures this cold until January. That's pretty cold here for December. Now, this is temporary. It's going to warm up starting tomorrow. And also, the wind was pretty brutal. And so they were answering a question on a local newscast tonight, and this, you probably should know this if you don't live in these type of climes. Wind chill only affects humans. It does not affect inanimate objects. It doesn't. Now, as far as like your car engine, it will cool it down. The wind will make it cool down faster if the wind's blowing over it. But the wind chill per se does not affect it, because wind chill regards the temperature of exposed skin. That's what it's actually about. And that's also the Fahrenheit scale, different from Celsius, is also based on how it affects humans. So it goes like this: 100 degrees, humans' bodies basically run at 98.6, regardless who you are. I think I run about a temperature degree colder or whatever, about that, at 100, you're a couple degrees hotter than your internal body temperature. And because of that temperature was decided on by the by the Fahrenheit guy. I don't know who he is. I don't know who the Fahrenheit guy is. I think his name, is Fahrenheit. I think. But I'm just sitting here amusing myself. No one's going to call in tonight, and I'm really pissed off. I really am. I like talking to you guys. So the Fahrenheit scale is it that 100 degrees is the temperature at which your skin can no longer uh, evaporate moisture. In other words, it's now hotter on the outside of your body than on the inside. That's what that means. 0, on the other hand, is the temperature at which exposed skin freezes in 15 minutes. 32 is the temperature the water freezes at, but your skin will freeze at exposed. That's the key here. Exposed skin will freeze in 15 minutes at 0 degrees, and that's the reason they set that. So you got a pretty good idea. Yeah, a 0 is pretty freaking cold. Matter of fact, my general rule of thumb is I refuse to put a coat on. I just do, and I won't at all if it's above 32. Especially if it's above 40. No, I want to. If it starts to get down to the lower 30s, I'll wear a scarf. I might put a sweater on over my sport coat, that sort of thing. I mean, I'm done with this. I grew up here in Minnesota, then I moved away. I moved to Los Angeles. What the hell? What was I thinking? I came back. Honest to God, when I left here when I was 21 years old, I thought I was never going to come back to Minnesota ever again. So yeah, so much for that. Yeah. Now we got an interesting thing here, though, and that is this is a decidedly democratic state, and we still have a relatively functional government, and we might be the last one in America as far as liberal states go. It's still relative. I've met Tim Walz. I've dealt with him for business. I've met him on a couple occasions. I gotta admit, he's not a bad man. All that stuff there during the campaign. Yeah, he comes off as a weirdo, and he does. I'll just tell you that right now. He does, but he's attentive and he's not stupid. I don't like some of his political ideas, but still, I will stand up. I will confess the fact that he is not a bad human being. Keith Ellison, on the other hand, who's an attorney general in the United States of Minnesota, it made one of the worst first impressions on me of any person I've ever met ever. And I've met a lot of people. This guy is a scumbag. I mean, I can't say that more enough. I can't. This guy should not be in politics. He should not be in government, and he shouldn't be. I don't know what he should be doing, but whatever it is, it's like, I mean, talking about an disingenuous person. It's like, I don't want to get into it. I met both of those guys on business dealing with the state, and the contrast could not have been more stark. Like I said, Walz came off as a very cool guy, actually. Yeah, he's kind of a weirdo, but I'm kind of a weirdo too. So it's like, I don't hold that against people. He seemed competent. He listened. He was. I thought his judgment was relatively sound. I had no problem with him at all. Ellison can go bite it as far as I'm concerned. My life will be much better if I never meet that guy ever again. So there you go. That's the truth from me. Now, what's going on in the nation? This is really important, and this was on the billboard for the show tonight for the description. Is that there's drones flying around in New Jersey? They've been flying around there for about 4 weeks now, every single night, a lot of them, and people are really starting to get concerned. And your government, bless their hearts, is telling everybody there's nothing to see here. Just move along. Now, my God, talk about being insulting. First of all, they have concluded that there's no danger to the public here, even though they admit they don't know who's flying them and they don't know where they're from. They don't know anything about them. That's what they'll tell you, but there's no danger to the public. Well, then how do they know that? Well, they don't. Well, there's two things here. Either they know where they're from and they're lying about that, or they don't know where they're from, which means they're incompetent beyond belief. One or the other. Now, in the last 4 years, we've seen a lot of incompetence, and this is actually the problem because I don't. I've said this. If you listen to the show, there's been a constant theme here. I can't tell if these people are just royally incompetent, unbelievably incompetent, or they actually have a hidden agenda. And some it depends on what the thing is. Sometimes I think it's one, and sometimes I think it's the other. But I have no definitive proof. Like it's like with Joe Biden. I don't know if Joe has dementia or they actually knows on most days what he's doing, and he's just doing this crap because he's incompetent. I really can't tell. I just can't. And I don't know if anyone else can either. But these drones have been flying around New Jersey now for about 4 weeks. There's a lot of them, hundreds of them apparently. They're flying mostly from dusk to about 11 p.m. They don't usually past midnight. And there's several theories here. And I have to give you a theory. I'm going to give you a theory that this is, or I'm going to give you one of the theories. And that is probably the least chance of being true. But I still feel I need to give it to you anyway. So there's three possible things going on here. Either one, the drones are being flown by our government and they don't want to tell anybody. And we'll talk about that in a second. That gets to special access programs, which on the UFO stuff we've talked about a lot. Two, they're being flown by another government, and which apparently is most likely Iran, believe it or not, because Jeff Van Pelt, the congressman, he says he's been told this. He's the only person who's come forward who said that, though. And thirdly, and I know you're going to laugh at me, and like I said, this is the least plausible one, but I still have to throw it in the mix here. They're being flown by extraterrestrials. And you're wondering, and let me get to that first. You're wondering why would extraterrestrials fly stupid human drone with propeller drones? Because we wouldn't know they're extraterrestrial. That's why. Now, there's a history with UFOs going back 50 years of UFOs being followed and accompanied by black helicopters, right? Okay. You've probably maybe, I don't know if you've heard that before. I mean, there's multiple sightings of UFOs being accompanied or chased by black helicopters. So there's a theory here. First of all, I'm sure some of those helicopters are ours. I'm sure that's true. But there's a theory here that those helicopters are also extraterrestrial because now you think about this. Okay, you have the technology to fly across the galaxy. You're probably flying a giant mothership like a mile wide, right? I mean, it's like these things run like the dirigibles used to in World War II, or actually it was World War, between the wars, because by 1938 when the Hindenburg blew up, it was all done. But so we used to launch little airplanes off of dirigibles. We used to do that. Dirigibles were giant floating aircraft carrying the sky, basically. Like the Hindenburg was about 900 feet long. The Hindenburg was about the same size as the Titanic, believe it or not. And you needed that whole enormous space to put the gas in there to make the thing float. So, but my point is, there's a history of this. So you get a giant ship, and everyone said, the people who say they've been on these ships, the alien abductees, and God bless them, I have no idea who's lying and who isn't, but there's a fairly consistent story here, and that is these giant ships, and then they have these little scouter flying saucers that they send out. Now, I'm sure some of those saucers are not manned. I'm sure some of them are manned. So the not manned ones are essentially drones. And those of you who've seen these little spheres that have been flying around, like the government actually showed a video of one in the Middle East that was about the size of a beach ball, I think. And they're these little flying spheres are anywhere from the size of a softball to a beach ball or a little bigger. In other words, they basically go from like 5 inches across to about a meter, about a little more than a yard across. And people see them all over the place. They're silver. They're obviously metallic. They seem to fly with intelligence and no visible means of propulsion. right? Matter of fact, there's a very famous story. This is really weird because I can't imagine being this. Some guy, and I can't remember what city it was in America, was going out to left his office building, was going out to the parking lot to get his car, and he said there staring at him was a silver sphere about the size of a basketball, and it followed him around the parking lot. And he couldn't figure, like I said, no visible means of movement. That's just, he said it was obviously following him, and it was seemed intelligent control, and it was about at eye level. It was about 5 feet off the ground. Now, can you imagine that? That's creepy, weird, and hilarious at the same time. But anyway, getting back to the New Jersey situation. So I was telling you about the fact, okay, so these black helicopters have been following them and seen with UFOs for 50 years. So my point is, if the people have seen UFOs up close, the other general remark about them is that they're seamless. In other words, there seem to be no rivets, no breaks in the metal, nothing. It's like one single piece. And there's a reason there's one single piece, post, because we already can almost do this. They're being printed by atomic printers, atomic 3D printers. Now we already have 3D printers, and I want to, your 3D printer runs off of some sort of plastic or something like that, and you build little Lego crap. I don't know what the hell you're building, but you have to understand that the General Electric Corporation that makes jets, the actual jet engines for commercial aircraft, they can print an entire jet engine in a giant, enormous metallic 3D printer. They do that. That's how they make these jet engines. And so every single one of them is exactly identical. I don't know. I'm assuming they test them because they have to, because if they didn't, if they made a mistake, the whole company would probably come down from litigation. So, but the thing is, I mean, they are exactly the same. We're already doing that. So we can do that already. Now, that doesn't talk about, that's not printing on an atomic level. And what I mean by 3D printing on an atomic level is what goes on in Star Trek when Captain Picard orders his Earl Grey tea hot out of the replicator machine. So what happens there, and people are already working on this, but we can't do this yet, and I'll tell you why in a second. What happens there is that machine is about, if you see Star Trek, it's about the size of a microwave oven, maybe a little bigger. That machine basically takes a bunch of atoms and creates a teacup and creates the tea inside of it based on a pattern. It works the same way a regular 3D printer we have now works, except it works on an atomic level. In other words, whereas your 3D printer is using plastic or wax to make stupid Lego bricks, this one is literally using atoms, right? So it assembles the atoms, and it does this in Star Trek, it does it in about 10 seconds, maybe, right? Okay, so now that's our future. That's going to happen. That's going to be the evolution. I won't live to see it. You probably won't either. I figure we're talking maybe 100 or 200 years from now, but we're going to be able to do this crap. And when we can do that, that basically becomes the egalitarianism of society, in the sense that right now, for example, you can make an absolute duplicate of a Taylor Swift song, sound file, and send it anywhere you want, and anybody can do this, and they're all identical. And yes, and God bless Taylor Swift for making so much money. But someday you're going to be able to do that with physical items, and that will basically that's going to fundamentally change not society, only society, but the economy, because at that point capitalism might become moot, because capitalism, although we've stretched this now, as capitalism is still based on the scarcity of resources, right? So if you have no scarcity, which you'd literally be able to manufacture anything at any time, in a few seconds. If you have no scarcity, why do you need money? I mean, this is the really weird thing. I mean, I am fervently against socialism and communism right now, but it's probably in 100 to 200 years, it will probably be what makes sense. Now, that's really weird, and I don't want anybody to misinterpret what I'm saying here. Right now, it's a stupid idea. But when you can have any physical item at any time for no cost, Christ, I mean, what the hell happened? So the way I've envisioned this is you'll have one of these machines, just like on Star Trek. You'll have it in your house, and it will be able to do any reasonably small item. And if you want your new car or whatever the hell it is at that time, I don't know if it's a spacecraft or whatever. If you want a new car, you go down to the civic center where they have a giant one that's the size of a large room, and you print yourself a car. You put in an order to do one, and yeah, who knows? Maybe that takes several hours. I don't know, but they call you up and your car's ready, a week later, and you got a new car. And it costs, the only thing it costs is electricity to run the machine. And electricity, we're going to get to the point where that's completely basically free and abundant too. So my point, I'm getting back to the thing about the New Jersey drones. Okay, so if you have the ability to fly across the galaxy and print, in your room inside your giant mothership where you have a atomic printer that prints spacecraft in case you lose one or they crashes, and according it appears quite a few have, relatively speaking anyway. You make yourself another one. Why couldn't you print a regular human helicopter with gas in it? There's no reason you couldn't. It'd be simple, as a matter of fact. That's the thing. It would be absolutely simple. So my point is, and like I said, the chances of this on all the things that are going on here, I'm going to mention this first because the chances are pretty slim. I know that. And yeah, don't call me a weirdo because no, I'm admitting the fact this is really far-fetched. But the thing is a possibility, even though it's very minuscule. And that is, there's a possibility that these drones are literally printed by some extraterrestrial mothership and sent down here because we wouldn't suspect them. These are human items, and you want to get pictures, you want to get, it's like, okay, you can send the little sphere, but if the little sphere is weird, and we know it's weird, and that scares the crap out of people, but you send a drone literally with propellers, oh Christ, nobody's going to suspect anything. So anyway, I just want to get that out of the way right now. That's the least likely scenario. Let's talk about the other two likely scenarios, and that is that they're run by our government, or they're run by another government. Now, run by our government. So getting back to the UFO thing, there's a reason supposedly that the crash retrievals of UFOs have been covered up, and no one knows about them. Literally in Congress, nobody knows about them. Is because they are run as special access programs, SAP, which are black. It's the black programs inside of black programs. In other words, like I read online today, there's a good possibility that if these drones are an SAP program, there's literally only a dozen people in America that actually know that. So the military is not actually lying when they say they don't know what they are, because if they're special access programs, they don't. Well, there's people in the military that do, but they're not going to come forward. And it's a very, very small number. It might be 100, it might be 12, who knows? And so then people say, well, why would they do that? Well, this is what they would be testing, probably. Northern New Jersey, other than Manhattan, and you don't want to do this in Manhattan because that would not only would cause all sorts of problems with communications, but it'd be ridiculously noticeable. But other than Manhattan, Northern New Jersey is the most highly densely populated part of the United States. And so if you were come up, let's say this is the theory right now, that you came up with a device that could monitor or collect all cell phone data in a certain radius. I'm talking about all of them. Like, okay, so I have no idea how many cell phones there are in Trenton, New Jersey, right? Okay, let's say that. Okay, I have no idea. What are we talking about? Millions? But let's say you had a device that you'd fly over there and collect the data. And I'm not even talking about the phone calls. I'm talking about the actual like cell phone data, like your name, your email address, all that sort of crap, from millions of cell phones simultaneously. That's the type of thing realistically the government would work on. And that's the type of thing they'd want to test in that environment, specifically because there's so many people there. Okay, so that's one thing. So the government is actually not lying when they say they don't know what they are. Now, why they don't shoot one down, I have no idea. I mean, this is what the congressmen are saying this too. Why don't you just capture one? Shoot it down. And right now, citizens and state governments can't do that. That's illegal, but the federal government and the military can, and they have not done so. Which, so they look like idiots because they are idiots. I mean, who are they fooling? If if you truly don't know what these are and you haven't shot one down, you're incompetent. They did the same thing with the Chinese balloons, and that was the same type of deal. Those balloons were probably sent over the United States to collect information, and they didn't shoot those down to the very end, because, oh my God, it'd be terrible if we made China mad, because then Joe Biden wouldn't get his kickback. But that's okay. That's the most likely scenario. Then there's another scenario where, and I want to make sure I get this right. This is Jeff. No, I said Jeff Van Pelt. It's Jeff Van Drew, he is from a representative congressman from New Jersey, and he says he has been told by what he considers very reliable sources that these are being launched by a large ship off the coast of the East Coast that's piloted by Iran, and that these are Iranian drones that are being sent over the United States to collect information. Now, that's a possibility too, except the Pentagon is saying that's absolutely not the case, and they might be lying. Now, and we got to talk about this other thing too. It's plainly obvious now that the Pentagon lies to us all the time. This thing with the UFOs has gotten out of control, and we know verifiably for a fact now they've been lying, because that happened in 2017 when that article ran in the New York Times, and they reluctantly, it took them about, how long, 2 or 3 years, they reluctantly confirmed that information was true. They've been lying for 30 years. They lied about the whole thing. So we know they're lying. They lie all the time. The question is, why would you lie about this? Because, okay, first of all, the citizens are scared, right? So wouldn't you say something to kind of like, even if you knew what that was? And this is where we're getting, I'm talking about like scenario 1 and scenario 2. We're getting to the two, the likely things here. Like I said, the UFO thing, the alien thing, that's a real long shot, and it really is. But if you're talking about the two likely things, in other words, these are being flown by our government or they've been flown by another government, you would think you'd come up with something just to appease the public, wouldn't you? I mean, really, are you that insensitive? And then the second thing is, there's so much secrecy around this stuff now. I'm not even certain it works anymore. They're talking about, okay, let's say Iran is flying these things, right? Well, first of all, why don't you shoot one down? Because the thing is, someone would notice if you did. There's so many cameras in America everywhere now that if you actually shot one of these things down, someone would have it on tape somewhere, right? I suppose there's a possibility they actually want to follow them and see what happens. So they're not, they deliberately don't want to shoot them down, I suppose. But, well, yeah, it's not working. Hey, Pentagon, it's not what you're doing is no longer working. Excuse me. It's amazing what's happened with the press in America in the last 10 years or so, because now we have this election proved that for all the gaslighting and all the lying and all that, it basically doesn't work anymore. That's what the election proved. I mean, they did everything in their possibly could to uh discredit Donald Trump, and nothing worked. It didn't work. He still won. You know why? No one buys this crap anymore. That's the thing. No one buys it. Let me give you another example. And this sounds like I'm changing the subject here, but I'm actually not. So, Pete Hegseth got accused by Politico this week. He says he was invited to join West Point Academy and he declined. This is like 25 years ago. And they said there's no record of that anywhere at West Point. And they might be right. And let me get to that in a second, too. There is no record. But he saved his invitation letter. And they actually, apparently, I saw it. He posted on X. There's apparently like a certificate they kind of send along with it that says you've been invited to join West Point. Now, he declined. He did not join West Point. But he did get the invitation. And so he has the one-page invitation, the actual letter, and then the one-page certificate that goes along with it. And he showed both of them. And so now West Point is saying, "Oh, we're sorry, we had a clerical person here made a mistake." Oh, blah 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 blah. This is bullshit. They're lying. And the thing is, so you think, well, how does this regard the UFO thing? Bob Lazar. So Bob Lazar is a guy named 1989 who basically came forward and talked about Area 51 for the first time. He's also said he worked on crashed extraterrestrial spacecraft there. Now, what does that have to do with Pete Hegseth? Here's what that has to do. So he went public with this stuff in '89 and in '92, and it's still on YouTube. You can still watch it. I've said this many times, and you should. He posted basically what's essentially a lecture on how the spacecraft he worked on, what the propulsion system looked like, and how it worked. And he says that's what he was in charge of, is reverse engineering the propulsion system. So between that time, the 3 years, Lazar claimed, and always has claimed, he got degrees in physics from MIT and Cal Poly in California. They said they had no evidence of him ever going to school there. But George Knapp, the guy I was just talking about last week on the show, who has this documentary series on Netflix called Investigation Alien, and George has been doing this for a long time. He knows this shit. So he said that he actually went to the schools. He didn't talk to the schools themselves. He talked to people that worked and went to school there. And he said he found in both instances, he found gobs of students who said they went to school at Lazar. He said that was not a problem. He said they were all over the place, who said, yeah, this guy was on campus, this guy went to class, So it's plainly obvious that the schools are lying. Well, are they? Because the people that run the special access programs that keep track of the UFOs, they seem to be very, very good at expulging academic records. They do. So I'm getting back to Pete Hegseth now. How did I put that all together? Well, it's obviously they did the same thing here too. They expunged his record so they could say that he's lying. And then he had come up with a proof, and then they had a backpack and say, "Oh no, we made an error." Oh, bullshit! I call bullshit. It's bullshit. They're the ones that are lying, not Hegseth. They're lying. So it's plainly obvious they don't want him to be Secretary of Defense, and of course they don't, because he's going to take that place apart, and it should be taken apart. We have such an entrenched deep state bureaucracy now that is simply looking out for itself and also spends gobs and gobs of money, our money. I mean, it's unbelievable, and we're $37 trillion in debt. It's like, so it has to stop somewhere. Because literally the country will collapse at some point if it doesn't. It will collapse just under the load of the debt. The debt is already over 100% of our GDP, which is, everyone thought, well, that would be the world would blow up if that happened. Well, it hasn't blown up yet, but it will sooner or later if somebody doesn't address this. So these guys on this Doge thing, Department of Government Efficiency, that would be Ramaswamy and Elon Musk, and it's unbelievable. They're looking for volunteers to help them. They're saying this might be an 80-hour-a-week job for which there'd be no pay, and they've been swamped with applications. There's people who have written passionate letters saying, I want to help. I want to do this. I don't care if I get paid or not. Americans are not bad people. We aren't. We will volunteer for stuff we feel passionate about. But anyway, that's the reason I brought this up again, and that is, so there's the tie between Pete Hegseth and UFOs. It's like, no, this has been a running theme in the government for 50 years. If they don't like you, they're very good at getting rid of your academic records wherever you went to school. And and all of a sudden your academic history doesn't exist. And they just did the same thing to Pete, but fortunately for him and unfortunately for them, he still kept his proof. I don't, I have stuff that I've kept for 25, 30 years. The thing is, I don't know where it is. I don't know. I would have kept something like that, but I don't know if I could have found it. That's the thing. I mean, you don't even want to know. It's like, I got so much crap going on here. It's unbelievable. So yeah, so that's what Pete ended up doing. And so I hope he gets confirmed. Now, my boyfriend, Bill O'Reilly, my former boss at Clone News, Jeff Meyer, he calls Bill O'Reilly my boyfriend because he said we think so much alike. Uh, O'Reilly has said, and I've been disagreeing with that. I've always thought about writing him an email, but I just don't have the time. And really, is Bill O'Reilly that important? He only has $50 million more than I do. But Bill O'Reilly said he didn't think Pete was going to get confirmed. Now, I saw Bill O'Reilly's show yesterday. Was it yesterday or the day before? Where he says he's kind of starting to soften on that. And the thing is, I always thought Pete would squeak through because people are sick of being lied to. It's kind of like the Kavanaugh effect. They're going to approve Keith just because they're so tired of what people have been trying to do to him. And I said this too, and I got preempted that I thought the only single person that Trump has nominated so far that would not make it is Matt Gaetz, and it's not because of any sexual crap Matt did or anything, none of that stuff. The reason I didn't think Matt Gaetz was going to get approved is because there are people in Congress that served with Matt Gaetz. As a general rule, if you talk to them, they don't like him. They personally don't like him. And I really thought that would end up being that would be the kicker. And he ended up dropping out, so we'll never find out. But right now, I think the entire slate of all of Trump's appointees are going to be approved. I do, and I think Pete will too. So, you want to put some money on that, Bill O'Reilly? We can make it interesting, but you don't listen to the show, do you? All right, we're gonna take a break for a commercial. We'll be back in a couple minutes. Stay tuned, please. Hi, all. I want to talk to you about Conk News. You've probably heard me talk about this before, but if you're a news junkie, you should try this out. Conk News is a news aggregator. Now, there are plenty of news aggregators on the web, but Conk News is different than all the rest, and here's how. Most other news aggregators will lump the top stories from each news source under that news source. The top 10 stories, like, for example, from Fox News, Breitbart, the New York Post, etc. What Conk News does is it sends its servers out onto the web to over 75 different news sources every 3 hours. And yes, this is an automated process, but in this case, that's actually a good thing. And collects the latest stories from said 75 sources and then lays them out on its own front page in the order they were posted, regardless of the source. So you see the latest stories at the top of the front page, regardless of where they're from. And this is all free to you. You don't need to log in. You don't need to subscribe, register, nothing. It's completely free. All you have to do is go to conk.com to check it out. That's conk.com, 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 Conk News. Part 2 of Jim Peters at Night. I am Jim Peters. Episode 185. Oh, we kind of did this in reverse. Usually I kind of do political stuff first and then the UFO and stuff second, but we did this in reverse tonight because I want to make a point about how that UFO stuff tied into what's going on right now. And that's the thing. I've been studying the UFO thing for 30 years, and my interest in it is not just the fact that we have people from other planets visiting Earth. That's not just it. It's amazing how it interfaces with our current political situation and in the past too. I mean, it's really, really fascinating. I mean, I've talked about this before. Jazz Shaw, rest in peace, bless his heart. He's no longer with us, but he was coming on the show all the time, and him and I talk about this. That there's a huge struggle in the Pentagon about whether to tell the public that the extraterrestrials are here. And that was like one of the very few, if not the only thing Chaz and I ever disagreed on. He thought that the public was ready to hear it, and I didn't. Not so much because I didn't think the American public was ready to hear it, but I thought, well, if they tell the American public, they're telling the world, and I don't know if the world's ready to hear it. I don't. And there's another thing too. So Nick Pope, who you've seen on a zillion UFO shows and Ancient Aliens and all this sort of stuff, he manned the UFO desk at the Department of or the Ministry of Defense for the United Kingdom for about 8 years, I think, something like that, around the early 2000s. And he said something really interesting too. He said he was always thought that the public was ready to hear this, but he said COVID changed his mind. He said that we handled COVID so badly that, and he's not even talking about the government, he's talking about also the public's reaction to it, that he thought, well, maybe that's not true. Maybe I was wrong about the fact that um, that the public at large, the world population is ready to hear about the fact that we are being visited by people from outer space. And he's got a really good point there. I don't know what to say about it. So I'll tell you something I've been spectacularly wrong about: Bitcoin. And I'm laughing because you do not know. I've been railing. Okay, Bitcoin at this point, I think, is around 17, 18 years. If I'm right, I think it was founded in 2006. And this is the other thing about it. When I say founded, all right. So there's a guy named, what's his name? Sakamoto is his name. There's a statistical scientist who invented this, but nobody knows who he is. No, that's the thing. It's been people have tried to find out, and apparently run into debt. And he has successfully hid his identity from the public. Nobody knows who this guy is. So there's your one thing right there. It reeks of Batman. Yeah, it's like cartoon crap. It's like, what are we in the comic books? It's like, Jesus. So you invented supposedly this currency, right? And that's the other thing too. And I want to talk about that. We've had Murray Saber, the economist, on the show, and he totally agrees with me on this. So Bitcoin has marketed itself, or claims to be, both a currency and a commodity. In reality, it's neither. It's neither one of those things. Because first of all, it's a currency that you really can't spend really well anywhere, and not only that, we don't need another currency. People say, well, no. What about, the dollar's bullshit? Also, no, stop crying. No, we don't need another currency. And then, well, it's a commodity, and that is a place you can store money or buy that would hold value. And it, unlike every other commodity on the planet, it has no intrinsic value at all. None. That's been my thing. There's no reason Bitcoin should be worth anything. And yet it cracked $100,000 a couple of weeks ago. 18 years. I've been so wrong. It's unbelievable. And I'm starting to think that that this is going to be successful on its own momentum for no other reason, because as a commodity, it is right now, it's become a place you can store funds. That's basically what it is. You put your funds in there and they're not going to go away. And if you know anything about the blockchain, which is how Bitcoin runs, and that's the real invention of Bitcoin per se, not so much the currency in general, but the way it's managed through the blockchain, which this Sakamoto guy did invent. The blockchain has enormous number of uses. So as an invention, it's really quite substantial. But like I said, the Bitcoin is inherently, intrinsically worth nothing. It's not backed up by anything. It doesn't represent any physical item or any physical element or any of that sort of stuff. There's nothing to it, and that's always been my thing. It's really the tulips from the 1600s. And if you know anything about that, that was the fact where people went nuts about tulips for about, I don't know how long, 2 years was it, or something like that. And then the market crashed on, everybody lost their money. It's if the market hasn't crashed on Bitcoin in 18 years, it's just keeping going up and up and up. So this will be my luck too. I will now change my tune and said, excuse me, that there is that this is real, and then it will collapse. It will crash. But it cracked $100,000. I just read, now those of you who know anything about this, famously, the very first thing ever bought with Bitcoin was 2 pizzas from Papa John's. I think the guy was in New Jersey. This is in 2006, and I think the date, because it's called Bitcoin Day. I think it's May 22nd, if I'm right. He bought paid for Bitcoin with for 2 pizzas, and right now, I just saw this just the other day. Those 2 the amount that this guy spent on those 2 pizzas would now be worth $560 million. Okie doke. Okay, boomer. It's like my father-in-law, bless his heart, I love this guy. He told me that it was in the 1980s or 60s or something like that, and I think it was 1960s. He said that somebody gave him a tip on the stocks about this company this company called Casio, and he said he could have bought $10,000 of Casio stock at the IPO. He said, "I'm not gonna do this. This is bullshit, Japanese crap," and of course, he lost out on billions of dollars. And almost everybody who invests has some story like this. So I I never had any money, but I had a friend of mine who was constantly bugging me on stock tips because I knew I was plugged into the tech world. And I remember he said, "Well, okay." So he said, "Call me if you ever have a tip." I did call him one day. This is about, let me see, what's the date? It's about 1998, I think, roughly. I called him and I said, "Yeah, I got a top stock tip. Company's called Genetech." And he said, "What do they do?" Well, they're involved in DNA testing for the police. And of course, that was in its infancy in the 1990s. I don't know if you remember this. They O.J. Simpson got acquitted in 1992, and if I'm right, they had no DNA evidence for that trial because at that point it was so new, nobody trusted it. You can do you. So I told my friend, I said, well, buy this Genentech stuff. He said, buy. I said, how much is it? I said, $7 a share. He said, okay, fine. So he bought some. He bought quite a lot, as a matter of fact. And then 6 months later, he calls me up and he says, "You bastard! It dropped to $4. I'm getting out." I think he bought like 20 grand worth of something like that. So he in his mind he lost half his money. I said, "No, no, 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 don't get out, don't get out. It's gonna go." And then 2 years later, he called me up again. He says, "You know that Genentech stock I sold at $4?" He says, "It's now worth at 150." Yeah, no shit. But what do I know? And he said, "Why don't you bet your own money?" I didn't have any. That's why. That's why I didn't. Otherwise, I would have. So yeah, Bitcoin's just on its merry way, and it's not gonna. I don't know if it's ever gonna accomplish anything. It certainly seems to be lost as a actual currency now. Nobody, I don't hear. I mean, I know there's a few places you can actually use and stuff like that, but still, it's like that's become kind of over. But now it's used. Basically, people are parking their money there. That's what they're doing. So I don't know. Do we need a place to park money? That's the thing I don't really understand. But apparently some people do. And of course, like if your money keeps growing in value because it's parked in that, well, God bless you. Christ. So this was the other thing I put in the description of today's show about the ratings at CNN. And if you've listened or watched this show a lot, I go off on this all the time, but it's getting worse. CNN's ratings last week in prime time were 360,000 people. Now, I've said this before, and John Nolte at Breitbart agrees with me, and he tracks this too. He's one of their columnists. Anything under 1 million people in cable is zero, and they're going down. They're not even cracking 400,000 people in prime time, and their total day numbers are even worse. Meanwhile, and I'm not exaggerating here, Fox News has gone from 4 times the CNN's viewership to 7 times. Fox News is just cleaning up. Their prime time went from 2.5 to 3 million people. It's just, I mean, it's and it's the same things happening with MSNBC, but not quite to the extent of CNN. I mean, it's unbelievable. Now, if you live in a major city in the United States, if you live in like the top 20 largest cities in the US, there are local 10 p.m. newscasts in your town that get more than 360,000 people watching. Matter of fact, there are quite a few. That's not unusual at all. Nobody's watching this. Nobody. So Comcast, well, this is MSNBC, not CNN. Comcast has put MSNBC on the sales block. They're trying to get rid of it. They're trying to dump it because at this point, it's reflecting badly on MSN and NBC News. And as I've explained in the past, the MSNBC as a logo, as the name of that channel, comes from the combination of Microsoft and NBC News. So that happened in the early '90s, if I'm right. They started this, and it was so MS. It was, and it was going. They were going to run it on the internet, and they did. And you have to understand, in the early '90s, video on the internet was absolutely terrible. I have a lot of experience in this because I know none of you are going to believe this, but it's really true. I'm credited with producing the very first television miniseries ever run specifically on the internet, and this is me saying that the Hollywood Reporter did. So, so I have some experience in this, but we were using real video, which was a brand name for its format at that time, and it just reminded me of television in the 1940s because it was in a tiny little screen uh, on your desktop browser. But yeah, so they started this and they're running newscasts, and it evolved or devolved or whatever you want to call it into what it is now, and now they want to get rid of it because NBC News doesn't want to have anything to do with it. They don't want to be connected to it, even though NBC News itself is one of the most left wing operations in the entirety of the news media sphere. It is, but they don't want to be associated with it. And then you're wondering, why did Joe and Mika go down and talk to Joe and to Trump at Mar-a-Lago? And the real reason is they're trying to save their ass, because there's a good possibility they're going to lose their jobs at some point in the next year, and if they do, they want to make sure they can actually resurrect somewhere else. And I don't know if that can happen to them. I mean, I think that Joe Scarborough is one of the most disingenuous people on the planet. She isn't. She's just an idiot. but she's not lying. I mean, she's a fervent leftist, and you have to understand, she grew up in the White House. Literally, her father was I can never pronounce his name, but no one else can either. Zbigniew Brzezinski, who was the Secretary of State for Jimmy Carter, and at the time, Mika and Amy Carter were the same age, and they were literally playing on the White House lawn as little girls. She grew up in the White House, uh, so she's been an ardent leftist in her entire life. So she's not actually lying. She's saying what she thinks. You know, he's lying. He was a Republican, and the only reason he's not a Republican anymore is to keep his job and also his marriage. You know, so yeah, so I don't know who's watching CNN, and you don't know either, and you probably aren't. But my mother, my 100-year-old mother, watches CNN. You know, because the thing is, it's been around since 1980. I mean, you have to understand, CNN it's 44 years old. It's been around forever. And so for a lot of people, especially a lot of older people, it still carries some institutional weight, and of course they trade on that, and that's the reason they're going to hell, is because they've been lying and lying to the public for the last 10 years. They've been gaslighting everybody, and they finally got found out with the election. They finally got found out. They guaranteed everybody that Trump was going to lose. He didn't. Not only that, he didn't even come close to losing. It wasn't even close. That's one of the reasons the left is not fighting back on this, because it wasn't close. It wasn't. Now, I don't know. People say it was a landslide. I don't know about that, because here's landslides. Landslides are when, excuse me, landslides is how Reagan beat Mondale in 1984, or Reagan beat Jimmy Carter. Those were landslides. I think Jimmy Carter had 48 electoral votes. I'm not kidding about this. This is not exaggeration. Well, Walter Mondale had 10. So I mean, those are landslides, but still, it was a very decisive victory nonetheless. It was. And so, they told their wonderful liberal audiences it wasn't going to happen. It happened in spades. And you know, I sat here and I had Mark Tapscott from the Epoch Times. He's a congressional correspondent there, and he came on, and he's about my age, and so we've been around the block a few times, and he his prediction almost entirely matched mine. As a matter of fact, the only thing I got wrong predicting the whole thing was that I thought Kamala Harris was going to win Arizona. That's it. I was wrong about that. Otherwise, I was right about everything else. I guessed the electoral count within two, and Mark did too. I mean, and so the thing is, and my question is, I'm just a guy sitting working his underwear in Minneapolis. How how could you not be working plugged into the zeitgeist of the American public, working for a major news publication and not know this? Are you really that in over your head that you can't figure this stuff out, or are you lying just to make everybody else in the newsroom and the 15 liberals following you on X happy? That's the thing I don't understand. But and I don't know if I ever will. But at any rate, uh, CNN's. I know what's going to happen to CNN. There's some indication that their corporate overlords might try to sell them too. And then they're thinking that they might just be included in the Max subscription service for HBO, and it would just literally just be one of the channels there, and then even less people would watch it. And seriously, I don't know how they can justify their budget, but whatever. Yeah, whatever, folks. That's the deal. I'm done for tonight. I'm sorry you couldn't call in. Like I said, after the first of the year, we'll fix this. But for now, we're when we come back on Monday, I don't know who the guest is going to be on Monday. We're scheduled to do one more week of shows before the Christmas break. Our last show is going to be next Thursday, the 19th. I know Santa's coming on that show. I know that. But we're not going to even try to connect to Blog Talk Radio anymore. We're done with this. So we'll have a new telephone number when we come back in January. I want to thank you for watching. I want to thank you for listening. I guess it's watching right now. Good night, Esperanza. Good night, Uncle Donnie, and good night to you wherever you are. We'll see you. We'll see you on Monday. You have a good weekend. Okay. Thank you. Take care.